It was October 16th, 2005, when the peace of rural Hunt County, Texas, was shattered. In a quiet, modest brick home off Highway 69, the kind of place where neighbors wave and crime feels distant. A crime so brutal unfolded, it stunned even the most hardened investigators. Inside their home, Dennis and Norma Woodruff, a couple in their 40s known for their warmth and devotion to family, were found murdered. Dennis had been shot multiple times. Norma stabbed, her wounds numbering in the dozens. The scene was not just violent, it was personal.
Investigators later described the living room as a bloodbath, a place where rage had been unleashed. Whoever killed the Woodruffs wanted them silenced, and silenced forever.
Dennis Woodruff worked in sales, the steady provider. Norma was the kind of mother everyone in the community seemed to know. Gentle, caring, the glue that held her family together. They had 2 children, Brandon and Charla. Both had grown up in the shadow of their parents' quiet discipline, Sunday church visits, and the values of small-town Texas.
To friends, the Woodruffs appeared like any other middle-class family. But beneath the surface, tension was building. Dennis and Norma were conservative, traditional, and Brandon, their 19-year-old son, was different.
When officers entered that October night, the clock was frozen around 9:30 p.m. Norma was slumped in the living room chair, her body riddled with stab wounds. Dennis lay nearby, shot twice in the head, once in the chest. It was overkill, a level of violence suggesting anger rather than a stranger's burglary.
There were no signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. Whoever did this either knew the Woodruffs or had been welcomed into their home.
The Hunt County Sheriff's Office immediately faced pressure. Double homicides were rare here. The brutality demanded answers. Investigators began retracing the Woodruffs' final day, questioning family, friends, and neighbors.
Suspicion quickly turned inward. Their son, Brandon, had been one of the last to see them alive. At 19, he was attending college and balancing a life his parents didn't fully understand. Nights out, new friends, and, though hidden from many, his identity as a young gay man.
The Woodruffs loved their children, but investigators soon uncovered tension. Sharp arguments about Brandon's direction in life, his studies, his spending, and unspoken conflicts about who he really was. Was it enough to drive a son to murder? Or were investigators blinded by assumptions?
Within days, whispers spread across Hunt County. Neighbors asked, could the Woodruffs' own son be responsible for such horror? Brandon would soon find himself not just a grieving son, but the prime suspect in a capital murder case. Brandon Woodruff wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a 19-year-old freshman, balancing classes at Abilene Christian University while enjoying weekends back home in Royse City. He loved horses, music, and had a reputation among friends as outgoing, even charming. But beneath that surface, investigators believed a storm was brewing.
On one side, Brandon was the dutiful son, keeping up the appearances his conservative parents expected. On the other, he was discovering a world they struggled to accept. Brandon was secretly gay, a fact his parents knew but did not approve of. To prosecutors, this cultural and generational clash became more than a detail. It became motive.
But was sexuality truly a motive for murder? Investigators argued Brandon lived a reckless lifestyle, spending beyond his means, lying about his whereabouts, and straddling 2 worlds. In their view, he needed money and resented his parents' disapproval. To them, the violent outburst inside the Woodruff home wasn't random. It was the breaking point.
The prosecution's timeline was clear. On October 16th, after returning home for the weekend, Brandon allegedly argued with his parents. Rage erupted. He shot his father, Dennis, then unleashed dozens of stab wounds on Norma. Hours later, he was back on campus, presenting himself as carefree.
Their evidence? Brandon had lied to friends about where he'd been. He gave conflicting statements about his evening, and police claimed they recovered a .22 caliber pistol, similar to one Brandon owned, linking him indirectly to his father's gunshot wounds.
But defense attorneys pushed back hard. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no direct evidence tying Brandon to the crime scene. Forensics couldn't prove his pistol had fired the shots, and most importantly, investigators found no bloody clothes, no trace of blood in his truck, nothing that conclusively proved he was there.
Critics later argued the state built its case on character assassination. They painted Brandon not just as a murderer, but as a liar, a reckless son, and a young man living a life his parents disapproved of. Was this truly proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Or a rush to judgment in a small-town community desperate for closure?
On October 24, 2005, just over a week after the murders, Brandon was arrested. The teenager, who had once been known for his smile and charm, was now facing the most serious charge under Texas law: capital murder.
The trial that followed would divide the community, capture national headlines, and raise questions that still echo today. Did Brandon Woodruff really murder his parents, or was he condemned because of who he was?
In March 2009, nearly 4 years after the murders, Brandon Woodruff's trial began in Greenville, Texas. Prosecutors were confident. They framed Brandon as a manipulative young man, living a reckless lifestyle, lying to friends, and burdened by financial stress. To them, the clash between his world and his parents' expectations erupted into violence.
But from the very first day, glaring problems surfaced. There was no DNA tying Brandon to the crime, no fingerprints, no bloody clothing or shoes. Investigators admitted they never recovered the murder weapon. Even the .22 pistol allegedly linked to Brandon could not be proven to have fired the fatal shots.
Still, prosecutors doubled down on circumstantial evidence. They argued Brandon's alibi didn't add up. Witnesses testified he had lied about his whereabouts. And the sheer brutality of the murders, over 20 stab wounds, was portrayed as an act of unbridled rage from a son snapping under pressure.
The defense fought back. They hammered on the absence of physical evidence. They emphasized investigators overlooked other possible suspects, and they accused the prosecution of putting Brandon's sexuality on trial, exploiting small-town prejudice to sway the jury.
One juror later admitted Brandon's lifestyle was discussed heavily during deliberations. For many, the case became less about what was proven and more about who Brandon was.
On March 20th, 2009, the jury reached its decision. Brandon Woodruff was found guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
For the Woodruff family, it was a bitter split. Some relatives believed justice had been served. Others remained convinced Brandon was innocent, that investigators had built a case on shaky ground and prejudice.
Brandon remains incarcerated in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, still maintaining his innocence. His case has been the subject of documentaries, appeals, and advocacy efforts that question whether an innocent man was condemned.
The murders of Dennis and Norma Woodruff were brutal and senseless. Whether Brandon was truly responsible remains a question that divides experts, jurors, and the public to this day. What's undeniable is the lasting wound left on a family, a community, and the pursuit of justice itself.
If you've followed this case with us, share your thoughts. Do you believe justice was served or denied? Let us know in the comments.
And if you want to hear more cases like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe here on YouTube. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at @TrueCrimeTexas214 for more updates and behind-the-scenes discussions.